Hello, it's time for me to read another chapter of God's Grace Keeps Pace. And we're to chapter 10 now. And I don't know if many of you listen to these or watch them or not, but I'm recording them for people that either don't have the book or they have limited eyesight and it's hard for them to read. And so it's my honor, if you are listening to it, to be able to record it. And chapter 10 is I Am a Promise. And that song blessed us so much. We used to sing it, the patterners, and I would sing it to Jan. And I will put the link. So if you've not heard this song, you'll be able to. And I love it, needless to say. I am a promise. Fight the good fight of the faith. Take hold of the eternal life to which you were called and about which you made the good confession in the presence of many witnesses. That is 1 Timothy 6:12. After another week of classes and much new training, we returned home excited and charged up to start our revised program. On Monday, June 11th, I had a meeting for our volunteer patterners. They were very eager to see how much Jan had improved, and they too were ready to fight the battle again and were equally impressed with the results we'd gotten in our 3 months of hard work. On the new program, we no longer needed to use the light table as frequently. Jan now saw well enough to notice her toys and what was going on around her. We continued the 500 watts of light flashing simultaneous with the introduction of taste and smells. But cause Jan's sense of feel was still not normal, we introduced tactile stimulation with more frequency, duration, and intensity. I warmed a wet washcloth in the microwave until it was very warm. I placed another washcloth in ice water until it was very cold, and we bathed Jan's arms and legs in one, then followed with the other. That really stimulated her sense of feel. It did mine too. I have a funny story about that too. One of my patterners ran in to warm the washcloth. It would be a wet washcloth, and we would fold it. But instead of 50 seconds, she put 5 minutes. And so we were busy patterning, and suddenly we started to smell something that smelled terrible. And there was a folded over cloth 4 times, and a hole burned through the middle of it. We decided we better throw that away and not use it. It was funny. A few weeks after we began the new tactile stimulation program, I took Jan to one of her childhood vaccinations. The poor nurse looked at Jan's skinny little hips and she said, I can hardly bear to give her a shot. There is just no meat there. And I wanted to be reassuring to her. And I said, I know. But I said, Jan's sense of feel is not normal. It's damaged. She won't feel the shot. She never had before. This time, as soon as Jan was injected, she started to scream. I was both surprised and overjoyed. Our seemingly cruel stimulation program was working. Jan was beginning to see and feel her world. On our revised program, we masked Jan only 70 times a day, but the time now was increased to 1 minute and a half. Jan was becoming a pro at masking, and she no longer fought it. By the end of the masking time, she was breathing very deeply in order to get her oxygen, and we knew that that too was working. Every day was divided into 7 minute intervals. I soon knew when the timer was getting ready to ring, and I was programmed to jump up as soon as the ding of the bell. I heard the ding of the bell, and if I wasn't careful, when the microwave dinged at my house or someone else's, I shot up because I thought it meant go mask. Once, as I was taking Ben to soccer practice, I took along my trusty timer so that I wouldn't get behind on the masking. I planned to mask her as I watched Ben's practice from the car, but I forgot that I'd left that timer on as we drove. It went off while I was stopped at a traffic light. Thankfully, I was just the first car by the traffic light. It went off without thinking. I pressed the gas pedal and ran the red light. For obvious reasons, I decided I'd better make certain the timer wasn't on when I was driving. The patterns remained much the same, except our little fighting girl was beginning to enjoy them as long as we sang to her the entire time. The most cherished patterners were those who could lead us in 5 minute silly songs. Music would become a lifelong joy of Jan's, and it impacted our family greatly. I never felt I could carry a tune, so I learned to resort to the tape player on days when no singing patterners could be found. Along this time, Bill and Gloria Gaither wrote a song for their kids and they recorded it. I Am a Promise. The first time I heard it, I fell in love with it. You're going to hear my off key voice, but I can't read it without singing. I am a promise. I am a possibility. I am a promise with a capital P. I am a promise to be anything God wants me to be. And that's the truth, folks. Uh, God has a plan for each of our lives. He did for Jan. He did for me. He does for you. What a joy that I Am a Promise song was. It became Jan's theme song. If you've never heard it, you can still find it online. I'll put the link after this. It impacted my life so much that I wrote the Gaithers a letter thanking them. I still have the sweet letter that I received back from Gloria Gaither. From then on, music was vital in Jan's life and ours. And it either played or was sung with each pattern and continued as Jan took trips down the inclined plane. As long as we clapped and cheered or sang for Jan, she'd slowly slide to the bottom of that inclined plane. So much wonderful change in Jan. And a new delightful device was introduced at this time. It was called the gravitational device. We built a wooden frame and sewed a muslin cloth sling that would support Jan in a prone position within the frame. We added grommets around the edges of the muslin and heavy duty springs hooked into those so they would hold that muslin this way. The other end of the springs were attached to the overhead wooden canopy. When we suspended Jan in the sling and turned on her music and cheered her on, she had the first opportunity to experience freedom of movement without any problems of gravity for the first time in her life. And I can tell you, she loved that gravitational device. It was delightful to watch her. She loved each session. She discovered that any movement she made caused her to bounce and swing. The more we cheered her on, the more she moved and the more she giggled. Soon she was soaring in that device. It remains one of the sweetest memories I have of Jan. Her smiling, soaring, and enjoying life. Patterners watching, cheering, and enjoying her because they had seen her go from a child that didn't respond at all to this little girl delighting in life. What a blessing for all of us. We nicknamed this device the spring turtle because Jan looked like a little turtle with her head sticking up from that sling. Since it was hard for Jan to hold her head up, that too was providing additional therapy for her because it was strengthening her neck muscles. She was suspended in it for an hour a day, divided into 4 15-minute sessions. What a joy it was for each of us to see Jan having fun. What a return those patterners were seeing on their donated gift of time and love, watching our little progress as her personality developed right before our eyes. Jan also started a beginning singing program. Words on 14 by 14-inch white cardboard written in red fluorescent markers were introduced. Those cards, 14 by 14, you can imagine, were good size, just cardboard. These bright words were introduced in a darkened room with a spotlight on each card. We did 8 sessions a day with 5 words each session. This was followed by floor time. We were more aggressive with our floor time now, having been given distances Jan had to move before she could get up. Sometimes an ice cube to the foot moved her along quickly. Other times, cheering and clapping did the trick. And Jan did begin to move. For some reason, she went backwards to start with instead of forward. But the important thing was that she was moving. By June 30th, after 19 days on the new program, many improvements were already readily apparent in Jan. She had run fever only once in those 19 days. That was amazing. We were still slowly decreasing her seizure medication, and her seizures had lessened considerably. She was moving more and had learned to get off the light table, so we had to watch her very, very closely. This all from a little girl who was almost comatose only 5 months before. The summer flew by with a flurry of activity and work. Soon it was time for our return visit to the Institute. Mike had already used up all of his vacation time, so for the trip, our pastor's wife Phyllis agreed to go with Jan and me. Phyllis had never flown before and was a bit nervous about the flight. I, on the other hand, had never found my way around in a strange city. That was always Mike's department, so I promised to reassure her in flight if she'd do the driving in Philadelphia. In case I didn't reassure her enough, she also took Dramamine. She was smart. We were quite the team. As always, it was a joy to arrive at the Institutes once again. Being united with what was like a second family was one of the things that I looked most forward to. How exciting to see some children begin to take their first steps, children who had never walked and were never supposed to walk. We cheered with those parents, not only for them, but for their children and for the staff of the Institute. Children began to crawl who had never crawled, and some began to read who had never read. That was the most exciting thing for me to see and to witness. Some began to see well enough to read after they had been exposed to the light table. Post brain damage days, all of us parents had certainly taken a lot for granted. Things like crawling, walking, talking, and seeing. Those are miracles in themselves. We all learned so many amazing things. Who knew the incredible dexterity it took to put the thumb and the index finger together to just pick up a dime? I also learned a new level of once taken for granted things to be forever thankful for. This one takes extreme dexterity to pick up a dime. I saw children improve greatly, but they would never get that dexterity to be able to pick up just a dime. Isn't that amazing what we take for granted that comes normally to us? Jan's major improvement was in her disposition. She wasn't crawling or using her hands, but she was definitely responding and developing a wonderful little personality. This time, her chest had increased by 0.8 centimeters. A normal child in the same length of time would average about 0.5 change. Her head size increased also by 0.8 centimeters. An average child's head would have increased by 0.3. Her head had grown 2.5 times faster than a normal child's head would have averaged in that period of time. That meant her brain was growing. We were so thrilled. Again, after a strenuous week of lectures and training, we were ready for our next part of the program. The lectures that we received at the Institute were done by just incredible people. People like Linus Pauling, who was an American Nobel Prize winning chemist. The research he had done on vitamin C helped our kids greatly. And I'll have to add something about the rooms where we took those lectures were really big and they were tiered like a football stadium. And they kept those rooms at about 65 degrees, if not lower. We had to bundle up, and a lot of times we'd be taking notes with gloves on. But they had found that you didn't get sleepy and go to sleep, and all of us folks were very tired, and you retained better what you heard in that cold setting. And so I remember that so well, sitting in that room, all bundled up, taking notes. And then across the back, in glassed in area were the interpreters, because the people came from all over the world. So those that didn't speak English had to have the interpreters with them. It was an incredible experience that we had. So back to Phyllis and I. Phyllis and I had a tiring but wonderful week. We only were lost a couple of times and considered ourselves a successful duo, reminding you that this took place before cell phones and navigational devices. We read a paper map, but we weren't home yet. We still had the flight back. Phyllis took her Dramamine, and we set off for the last leg of our journey. We would have a brief layover in Kansas City and arrive in Oklahoma City by mid-afternoon. Approaching Kansas City, we encountered extreme turbulence, and most turbulence I've ever experienced on a flight in my world. I'd given Jan a crushed up Dramamine so she didn't throw up. I'd not taken one. And as I braced both feet against the seat in front of me, I held a throw up bag in one hand and hugged Jan as tightly as I could with the other. It felt as if the plane was a giant frisbee being thrown upward and then slammed downward. I've never again experienced anything like that, thank the Lord. The pilot kept attempting to land, but he had such difficulty that he finally came on the intercom to tell us, "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing some difficulty." No kidding, I thought. Half the people on the plane were using their little throw up bags, all but Phyllis, who had faithfully taken her Dramamine. The stewardess struggled to keep their balance as they made rounds with trash bags to pick up our little bags and pass out new ones. Finally, they were throwing up too. That's how bad it was. I've never again seen anything like it. They had to be seated. Phyllis and I really thought a crash was imminent. We prayed together, but we were still both strangely at peace as we trusted God with the outcome. That storm never allowed our plane to touch down in Kansas City. We were forced to detour to Wichita Airport. Never had God's green earth looked so wonderful. As our entire group deplaned, one only had to look into each pale face, some brows still beaded with sweat, some people still crying, to know that we had been through a terribly frightening ordeal. And to think I was the one who assured Phyllis that flying was absolutely no sweat. I think it took quite a while before Phyllis flew again. We called Mike and Phyllis's husband Jack from a payphone to tell them we wouldn't be on our flight. We would be delayed. We finally made it home a few hours later and never had home and family look so wonderful. The next morning, my body was sore all over from that tense situation. I actually just felt achy and physically sick. Phyllis experienced the same thing. But a few days later, I held a meeting for my pattern nurse and once again eagerly shared Jan's progress report. They were always so excited to hear about her improvements. I gave God the glory for what we'd been able to accomplish and thanked each one of them for their wonderful support. It would be 6 months this time instead of 3 before we would return to the Institute. And as usual, we had our work cut out for us. We were a team working together with common bond, Jan. Someone suggested ordering matching shirts. We decided to call ourselves Jan's Clan. And we ordered red shirts with bold white letters that proclaimed Jan's Clan. When they arrived, even Brother Ben proudly wore his to school. There were many new changes to our program. Jan's masking was reduced to 52 times a day, but increased in time to 2 minutes each. We continued with the patterns, but only needed to do six a day. Our time on the light table decreased to 10 2-minute sessions. Jan was behind when we started the program. The light table restored the blindness that was caused by the brain damage itself, but there had been permanent damage to Jan's optic nerve, and nothing could restore that. She was able to see at close range, and the bigger and brighter, the better. We were told that if intellectually she was capable of reading, the words would have to be several inches tall for her to be able to see them. The beginning sing program changed significantly. This part of the program introduced not only 10 by 10 bright, bold shapes on a 14 by 14 inch white background of cardboard, but fluorescent red dots, 1.25 inches in diameter, and the dots were from 1 to 100. Like there'd be one orange fluorescent dot on one cardboard, then there would be two, then there'd be three fluorescent dots, then there would be five, all the way up to possible 10 per sheet, till you went all the way to 100. And additional reading words still were printed on with fluorescent paint too on cards. The room was still darkened during these sessions, and a spotlight was placed on each homemade card. We were giving Jan every possible advantage to help her see and feel her world. Jan saw 5 cards at each session for a total of 8 sessions a day. 2 of the cards were shapes like squares, triangles, etc. 1 card was a dot card, and 2 cards had words. Again, bearing in mind that Jan could not use her hands, she could not speak, she couldn't see very well. And so we were teaching her the things that you would learn, like your normal child. You would say, here's 2 carrots, here's 2 balls, here's 3. You gradually, they learn numbers and things just from how we interact with them. A child that is locked in their own body does not have that opportunity. So we were bringing that opportunity to her. However, I lost my place because I started talking. Each day we added 4 new shapes, 2 new dots, and 4 new words, and we retired 4 old cards. Each card was held up from 1 to 3 seconds with a spotlight on it to make sure she could see it. This became something that Jan thoroughly enjoyed, many times laughing at the same word or picture. For example, to this day, I still remember we had a picture of a ring-necked pheasant. Jan just cracked up every time we held up that picture of the ring-necked pheasant and said, ring-necked pheasant. She just would laugh, and then all of us would laugh. We showed her common everyday things too, that if she was normal intellectually, she would have learned. For example, banana, apple, glasses, toothpaste, sun, moon, any common words that, and some of them not very common. I don't know. I knew what a ring-necked pheasant was until I started that program with Jan. We continued with the spring turtle, 4 15-minute sessions a day, and the hot and cold stimulation. In addition, we added rubbing Jan down with a vegetable brush, and yes, I did say vegetable brush, and a Teflon pad. We rubbed her enough to redden her skin. Since her sense of feel was not normal, the rubbing seemed to feel good to her. I often wondered what people thought the first time they visited us and saw our unconditional program. Can you imagine if you walked in not knowing anything and you see somebody rubbing the child down with a vegetable brush or a Teflon pad? I'm sure they thought, what in the world? Our major new addition to the program was respiratory patterning. We needed an electric metronome and a respiratory jacket to put this into effect. I made the jacket from an institute pattern, making it from muslin and lining it with batting and quilting it to make it strong. It came together in the front, very much like a vest would, except there were where buttons would have been and buttonholes on the other side. There were long straps that crisscrossed, and at the end of them, there was a dowel on each side so that whoever sat on one side could pull. Respiratory patterning took 2 people in addition to Jan. Jan was placed on her back on the patterning table, and a person was seated on either side of her. When each of us pulled, the jacket tightened around Jan's chest, forcing the air of our out of her lungs. Jan was patterned at 30 respirations per minute, 2 beats of the metronome for inhaling and 3 beats for expiring. The metronome setting was at 150. Our goal with this procedure was to help Jan, her circulation improve and hopefully decrease some of her tightness. It also gave Jan's Jan's brain, the information of this is how breathing correctly feels. There was only one problem. I had absolutely no sense of rhythm. I still don't. I couldn't follow the beat of the metronome. I would be off and I wouldn't even know I was off. And the timing was very critical. I had to make certain that second person working with me had rhythm so I could follow their lead. Choir members from our church were great at this. We were to build up our sessions until we were doing respiratory patterning 3 hours a day. I hoped this would also retrain my brain, but I still don't have any sense of rhythm. In my records, I find this note. Jan, this was October the 28th. Jan is 22 months old. She responds well, cries when she isn't getting her way or getting fed when she wants it, laughs at her words and pictures that we show her, goes down the inclined plane fairly well, adores praise, laughs out loud, almost demands entertainment during respiratory patterning, does not like to eat for anyone but me. God's grace keeping pace. I learned that truly with God, all things were possible. All things are possible. They really are. My part was to keep placing all my hard places into his skilled hands and then look for his provision. His provision many times does not look like what we were expecting. Let's keep looking for his glimpses of grace. They are always present when we give it all to him. And here is one of my favorite pictures of Jan in the spring turtle. And it was just such a precious thing to see. And you know, back then we didn't have cell phones with videos, and we didn't have anything that took pictures real quickly. I have very few pictures of that program. And today we're so blessed. We film and take pictures of almost everything. And if y'all know me, you know every bird that comes into our yard almost I stamp a picture of if I see it, and the deer. And I didn't even have that kind of access to a camera when my grandsons were little. I sure wish I had of, because today we're blessed to have so many pictures that we can take. Okay, that was I Am a Promise. I hope you enjoyed it, and blessings to you. Bye.